Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome to your Tuesday edition of the Post Up with David Grubb here on Boot Crew Media. I, of course, am David Grubb. Today we're continuing to monitor the fallout from the Zion Williamson lawsuit, the mounting number of teams trying to uh, take Trey Murphy from New Orleans, and then the Pelicans' options if they decide to either uh, rebuild this organization from the bottom up or to continue to regroup around Zion Williamson and keep going from here. So first, we're going to talk about Zion's trade value, and the New Orleans Pelicans are in a very difficult position now with Zion Williamson. If they decide to keep him, they are taking a bet on a player who has missed more games than he's played, and that has shown a propensity for making bad decisions off the court. Um, I think that with the Pelicans, you can understand going either way. That, of course, you always bet on talent in sports. Teams will give talent as many opportunities as necessary to prove that talent can't cut it. It's hard to find another person with Zion Williamson's talent, and I've been one of the people who said that constantly. Is that you just don't give up on this kind of player because you need somebody who can win in the playoffs for you, somebody who can win series for you. The counter that has always been that Zion hasn't been there. But the Pelicans have been to the postseason twice, and he wasn't there either time. So again, I understand choosing either way, and that's why we're going to discuss that a little bit later. But I would say that there's always going to be interest in Zion Williamson, but I think at this date and time, there's not going to be a great willingness on the part of teams around the league to part with any real talent or picks for Zion Williamson. I think the reports that we had over the last couple of weeks about what teams are willing to give up are going to change now. Even if Zion is proven, if he wins his court case, his civil case, even if he wins that, there are going to be teams that just feel like they have the Pelicans where they want them and are not going to give up major assets in order to take on Zion. That leaves the Pelicans with a real dilemma of a choice. Do you cut Zion Williamson before July 15th and recoup some money, but also you take a small cap hit? Or do you go ahead and trade Zion Williamson and try to get whatever assets you can get it for him? Or do you can keep him for another year and see what happens if you can build around him at all, or you just try to maintain ground and see if he can build up his trade value over the next season so you get something better next year? Again, that is contingent on Zion Williamson being available to your team throughout the season, and then his ability on the court, and what does he produce as far as his numbers? Does he make the Pelicans a better team in order to build that trade value up? Right now, I say it's as low as it's ever been. Outside of him missing an entire season, there's no way to diminish his trade value anymore. So the Pelicans have to be really careful about what they decide, because every one of these decisions is going to send them in a different direction with this franchise. And you can survive all of those positions. You could even thrive in all of those positions, but you better pick one and stick with it. And that is continues to be the theme for the New Orleans Pelicans year in and year out, is pick a plan and stick with it, because they've not been able to do that. They didn't do it with Anthony Davis, and they couldn't pull off what their original plan was of stockpiling young veterans around him and that group growing up together. That didn't work. Then when they went in and got veteran players to surround him and Drew Holiday with, that only lasted for 1 year. The Pelicans couldn't hold it together long enough to see if that could work. And then, of course, injuries befell them in the form of DeMarcus Cousins, and you moved on from him because you couldn't hold that plan together ultimately because of Boogie's injury. You go into the Zion Williamson era, and you've had multiple directions. Whether you had the speed and the tempo that defined the first two seasons of his career, or if you had the defensive first approach of Willie Green that have defined the last 4 years, and there just seems to be a disconnect ultimately in how the Pelicans utilize Zion, what they are willing to let him do on the floor, what they are willing to let him battle through as far as his health concerns go, and um, the limitations that they want to consistently place on him. So, if you don't want Zion Williamson, then you need to move on. However, you need to see fit. You see fit, but you need to do that quickly. You need to go ahead and make that decision and make it quickly. Um, the player who does have plenty of value around the league is Trey Murphy. And you can already see teams jockeying for position if Trey Murphy becomes available. There are four teams that have really been mentioned more often than not. There are gambling odds on which team will land Trey Murphy the most, and the team that is currently in first place in those odds. And though I still would say that the odds of the Pelicans moving Trey Murphy right now are low, but if they decide to go into a full rebuild, then moving Trey Murphy, your number one most attractive asset, has to become a priority because you're going to lose Trey if you're in a rebuild. He's going to demand a trade. Yes, and this is honestly, this is the best time to trade him is early on in his extension. It becomes harder to trade a player the more expensive they come. Trey's contract is only $25 million next year. That is a great price for somebody who can give you 20 points per game, who can give you 4 assists, who can give you 6 rebounds, who's going to shoot 45% from the floor, who's going to shoot near 40% from three, and who's going to shoot 87+% at the free throw line. He's going to do it efficiently. So there's a lot of value certainly out there for Trey Murphy. The problem, I think, when you look at what's available to the Pelicans from the teams that really want him, is that there are not a lot of great options. Denver has been the that has been put at the top of these rankings for potentially getting Trey. But what can the Nuggets offer? If the best that they're offering is Michael Porter Jr., Christian Braun, who's going into the last year of his rookie deal, and you'd have to extend him, I don't know how much you value him, but do you think that Pelicans fans think that he's worth $30 million a year on an extension? Do you think Christian Braun is that kind of player who's going to give the Pelicans 20 points per night? I don't know. But if all they can offer is a late first round pick, Christian Braun and Michael Porter, if I'm the Pelicans, that's not enough of a deal. That's not good enough. I think I can get more than that for Trey Murphy. I think I can get better than that for Trey Murphy because I don't want to take on Michael Porter's deal. It's too expensive, it's too long, and he's a player with a history of back injuries. I'm not taking 6'10" guys who have a history of back injuries. His career could be short at any time. He could suffer another back injury and his career becomes limited. His role is already limited. He's basically a shooter, and that's it. He doesn't put the ball on the floor. He doesn't create for others. So where are you creating this kind of gravity for him to thrive in? I don't think you have that. Obviously, if you're starting to get rid of players like Trey Murphy and Zion Williamson, your gravity's gone. So what is Michael Porter Jr.'s value to you on that very expensive contract? If you're getting rid of Trey Murphy, you are in a rebuild and you need picks. You need flexibility. That's not what that deal gives you. Another team, Cleveland. I think you could make a deal with Cleveland depending on what they're willing to give you as far as picks. Because if you're talking about a deal that's centered around either Darius Garland, whose contract has 3 years and 125 million roughly left on that deal, or Jared Allen, who has 4 years and $110 million. Remember, Jared Allen is 27 years old, so he would be going into his early 30s when you're done with his deal. But it's a relatively decent deal for a starting center in the NBA. You're not talking about an exorbitant amount of salary there. But if you're taking on Jared Allen, you want picks. You want those kinds of picks for the ability that Trey Murphy has. If you're taking on Darius Garland, you need less in the terms of picks because you're getting a younger player who still may have upside. He's a guy who can give you 20 points per game. He can be your lead guard, not necessarily a traditional point guard, but he can be your lead guard. So you can be happy with a Darius Garland. The contract is a bit more expensive, obviously 3 years and $125 million, but that's not a long-term deal. That's only 3 years. So you are not trapped into him for 6 years or something like that where you feel like you can't evaluate him and move off of him. If you're not happy at the end of year one, he's a trade asset. If you're not happy going into year three, he's a trade asset. And it's not a prohibitive cost considering what lead guards go for in the NBA and what you would be getting in Darius Garland. So I think you could make that deal with Cleveland, but again, it depends on the kinds of picks that you're getting with that deal as well. And if you need to rope in some other players to make that deal work, let's say if you had to add a Kelly Olynyk into that deal for Darius Garland to make the salaries align a bit more, then what are you getting as well? Because you're giving away an expiring deal to the Cavs to give them financial flexibility to help them out. So again, you'd want more draft assets in return from the Cavaliers, and you worry about where those draft assets are going to be because the Cavaliers probably are going to remain a good team if you're talking about a core of Evan Mobley, Trey Murphy, and Donovan Mitchell staying together for the near future. So if you're taking those picks, you want picks that are down the road like 2030, 2031, beyond and beyond in order to capitalize on the Cavs eventually um, doing an about face at 180 and becoming a more mediocre team. But that won't happen in the immediate future if that's the roster that they have. Um, the Los Angeles Lakers have been one of the teams that, and of course, anytime there's a player being discussed of any measurable talent, then that people are going to talk about what the Lakers can offer. I don't like what the Lakers can offer. Rui Hachimura, Dalton Connect, and Shake Milton, and a first round pick that's down the road, a few years down the road, and some pick swaps. I don't like that deal for the Pelicans. I don't think Rui Hachimura, he's a fine player, but I don't think you're getting enough talent here. Dalton Connect is not a starter. He didn't really super impress the Pelicans. Shake Milton's salary is only $3 million. So losing him or keeping him, he's not staying around for the Pelicans. He's not a piece that you're keeping. So you're just getting rid of him at $3 million. When does that first round pick come due, and what if you're the Lakers, how valuable are Lakers first round picks usually? It's rare that you're going to find one in the lottery or high in the lottery. So that Lakers pick may not be worth much as well. And I just really don't like the player talent in return. The same as with the Milwaukee Bucks, another team that has been talked about. The problem with the Bucks is that the Pelicans already control the Bucks picks for the next two drafts. So you're looking at really down the road picks for the Bucks and hoping that they become bad. And this is contingent on them keeping Giannis. So if they'd have to keep Giannis in the for this deal to work for them, because you got to get something else from them, and they don't have anything. If they're trading Giannis, they may be getting players back, they may be getting picks back, but they certainly aren't trading for Trey Murphy if they've traded Giannis. So you're thinking that they've kept Giannis for this deal, and the player assets aren't great. You're counting on some players to opt in with the Bucks, but their player assets to match a Trey Murphy contract. You're talking about Kyle Kuzma. You're talking about Bobby Portis, um, Pat Connaughton. Those are the kind of players that you're really looking at, unless you're taking a bevy of young players from the Bucks, and none of those players look like they're stars or potential stars. They haven't played a lot, but if you're the Pelicans, you're trying to get some kind of sure thing in return for those draft picks, and the Bucks don't have a ton of draft assets. So I don't know what the great options are for Trey Murphy. Somebody's going to have to come with a better deal than these that have been proposed so far. I think that the Pelicans can get, even in a fire sale situation, Trey Murphy is still an ascending player who a lot of teams view as a future All-Star. If that's the case, these are not deals that make you feel good, because you're not getting any future all-stars in return. You're not getting players that are younger than Trey that you think have a higher upside, or at least as high an upside. You're either getting players, for the most part, outside of that Cleveland potential deal. If you get a Darius Garland or a Jared Allen, you're kind of solving one of your problems. But you also need to get some draft capital there, and you don't know what that might be. But most of these deals, to me, just don't make a ton of sense. The Pelicans do have two options. Again, as we talked about earlier, they have the option to rebuild. They have the option to reform. Reforming means that they're going to stick with Zion Williamson. And if they plan on keeping Zion, what do you build? How do you build this team around him in the short term? Because we're not talking about a long term situation with Zion. I think no matter what, even if the Pelicans decide to make this work, you're still talking about a 3-year window with Zion Williamson that you're going to get the best out of him for any team. So I think that's another limiting factor. Is teams don't think that there's just a lot of years on the back end of Zion's career. You're either trying to finish this current deal out and see if you can maximize him, or you're thinking for shorter deals beyond that. But I don't think you're looking at Zion Williamson as a player that you're looking at in his 30s that you want to build around. So if you're the Pelicans and you're looking at this short term, then I think no matter what your options are, the first matter of business is trading CJ McCollum and Kelly Olynyk. Those need to be priorities no matter what the Pelicans decide to do. You have to get value for CJ McCollum, and his your bargaining position gets worse as the season goes on, because assets have already been given away. This is your time to go get assets from a team for CJ McCollum and for Kelly Olynyk, a veteran in the last year of his deal, who does not have an exorbitant contract either. I think that should be priority number one, no matter what. Number two is securing scoring and size in this draft. That's part of the reason you want to utilize CJ McCollum in part of any deal. I think you could get a second first round pick in this draft for CJ McCollum, depending on the teams. One of those teams that I would target, the Orlando Magic, who need outside scoring and who have players that they can discard and who have multiple picks in this draft. If you can do that, if you secure a second first round pick, you now have multiple options to pursue. You could take size early in the draft and go for a Cayman Malawak or a Derek Queen. You could take them early in the top 10 and you could get your perimeter player later on. There are going to be options later in the first round. If it's 16 from Orlando, if it's 25 from Orlando, there's going to be another player there who may not be a starter, but certainly you're getting another talented player in this year's draft to go along with what you already have. You could go the other route and you could take Shooting and Concaniple, or you could take one of the other players in the perimeter who are at the top and pick you a pivot, a center later on in the first round and grab one of those other bigs that you like that has potential. You could do that, but I think that if you're going to build around this team this year, that's the key to do that. You've got to hit some home runs in this year's draft for this team. It needs young players. Then you release Elfrid Payton and Brandon Boston. They should be gone because neither one of them, I think Brandon Boston becomes redundant. He's also injured. I think you can find him his way back to the roster if you need him at some point. But the main thing I think is that you want to find a veteran backup point guard and a veteran center, and you need to do that by replacing those two guys. You'll clear up some roster space potentially in a McCollum or a Olynyk deal, but you're bringing probably players back in that deal. You're drafting two more players in the first round, so then you need a point guard, a veteran point guard, to either be your stopgap while DeJounte Murray is out, or a veteran point guard. If you draft a point guard in this draft, if that's who your early pick is a lead guard or a point guard, then you need somebody to educate that player and teach them the ropes of being a point guard in this league. If you make a deal for a center, if you move and you get a draft a center in this draft, if you get a Common Malak, you still need a veteran center to go along with him and Eves Misi to give them some stability at that position and some size and shot blocking. So you're going to go out and pursue those players, and you have the financial ability to do that because you have your mid-level exception, and you also have the trade exception that you got for the Brandon Ingram deal. You have a couple others as well that you could use. So I think that if you're going to reform this team around Zion Williamson, what you're doing in the short term is you're trying to build around your core of Herb Jones, Trey Murphy, and Zion Williamson this year by supplementing them with young players in this year's draft and then filling the holes in your roster that you have. You're going to look and see if this team can perform when healthy and if they can get you in contention for the at least the play-in. If that's the case, then you're making a new decision going forward. And in the 2026 27 season, you're going all in. And you're either using those young players who looked good, hopefully for you in year one, to go get that great player, or you're moving from Herb Jones and you're trading some of those types of assets. If you got a DeJounte Murray back and he looks like he can play, you're trading him, and you're trying to go all in for a championship with a healthy roster. That would be one path to go down. The other path is to start a rebuild and to go ahead and make this thing, to blow it up, burn it down, and start from scratch. Tear it all the way down to the studs and really rebuild. If that's the case, that means you're going to have some unattractive options. And to me, if you're going to do the rebuild, then trading Zion to me becomes a less palatable option if I'm not getting picks for Zion Williamson. Releasing him, and you'd have to make that decision by July 15th, releasing him starts to look like the better option. Because if I know I'm not keeping him around, if I know that I'm not going to get great trade assets for him in the terms of picks, then getting the financial freedom that comes with letting him go might be the better option. Again, the Pelicans would take a $7.5 million cap hit, which is not really a lot. And they wouldn't have a whole bunch of room to make moves in the offseason outside of those exceptions. You have a $13 million exception for the Brandon Ingram deal. You have a $2 million one from Daniel Tice that you could still use, though if you use one of them, if you use one of the options, you can't use the others, and you can't combine them for a single deal. You have a $10 million one from the Jonas Valanciunas deal as well, but you're focused on the $13 million because you're trying to get the best player you can if you're getting rid of a Zion Williamson. So you take the $7.5 million cap hit, you get nothing for him, obviously. But what you're looking for then is, what are your priorities? I think you start with that priority of trading CJ and Kelly Olynyk. You're getting rid of them. You're trading Trey Murphy. You're trading Trey Murphy if you're in a rebuild, because Trey doesn't want to stay. He's not going to stay around for a rebuild. He just went through a semi rebuild over his first 4 years of his career. He's not doing that twice. So you got to trade Trey Murphy. I think that means you keep Herb Jones. And people say, well, why would you keep Herb? He's a good trade asset. Yes, he is. He absolutely is. And you could probably get a first round pick for Herb Jones right now. But here's why I'm keeping Herb Jones if I'm in a rebuild. Herb Jones's contract is really friendly to the Pelicans. Um, and in the short term, he's for one more year. I'm not trading Herb this year. I'm thinking about trading Herb next year, because the one thing I need is somebody on this basketball team who has high basketball IQ. If I'm getting rid of Trey Murphy, I'm getting rid of CJ McCollum, I'm getting rid of Kelly Olynyk, I've gotten rid of Zion Williamson, I've gotten DeJounte Murray is still going to be out until probably January. I got to have somebody on the floor who can play basketball, who can make this team somewhat, palatable to watch. Because I'm taking in either bad contracts for some of these guys so I can get more pick assets, or I'm getting a lot of young players in return to try to figure out if any of them can be stars. And I'm filling out the roster with stopgap veterans. So if that's the case, somebody's got to be a decent basketball player. So Herb Jones has more value to me because of his low contract and his ability to help this team be better on offense and defense, seemingly no matter who's on the floor. His value for me for one more year is still pretty high. And I can still trade him in the last year of his contract and get more assets, because I think his value doesn't diminish as long as he's healthy. Now, if I have the option too of moving on from Herb during the season, if again it just feels like it's the better move. But in the short term, if I'm offloading my stars, I can't get rid of everybody. I'm keeping somebody for some continuity, and if I'm still keeping my coach, which to me, if you're doing a rebuild, I think that leans into the Pelicans for as their reasoning to keep Willie Green. If they decide to do a rebuild, why am I going to overpay a coach to lose? Then I'm fine paying out the rest of Willie's contract. If it's this year, or if it's one more year beyond that, I'm fine with paying that out because I plan on losing anyway. And if I'm going to lose, again, I'm not overpaying for a coach. And then I have a whole different situation that when Willie's contract comes up, now I can go and find the coach that fits what Joe Dumars wants to do without upsetting the apple cart, so to speak. Now, that's a bitter pill to swallow for Pelicans fans, and I understand why it's a bitter pill to swallow. But if you're looking at it purely from a business perspective and what makes sense, I'm just saying from the outside looking in, if you're talking about a reason to keep Willie Green, knowing you're going to lose and knowing that you want somebody who's going to be stable throughout that, who isn't going to change their emotions much, who's going to still stay in front of the media and answer questions the same way, then that's the guy for you, right? You know what I mean? Like, they're the good soldier in that circumstance. He's not going to go out there and talk like Stan Van Gundy and talk about what's going on with the players and what's wrong with them. He's not going to do it. You may get a bit of a backhanded comment every now and then from Willie Green, but that's about as deep as it gets. So if you're the Pelicans and you're planning on losing, then keeping Willie Green seems like the short term move to make. Why spend more money than you have to? Right? You've been up against the tax and you didn't want to pay it. Then it's time to bottom out, because there's nothing worse to be in the NBA than mediocre. Being in the middle is the worst place to be because it's almost impossible to get any higher, and you're not getting the assets that are the attractive part of being worse. So I think those are the options for the Pelicans. You either run this thing back kind of and build around Zion in the short term and see what you can get if you can put together a respectable team that way, or it's time to scrap it all and rebuild and do this thing from the bottom up and try to rebuild this team, without Zion Williamson and without Trey Murphy. And you try to move on from DeJounte Murray if you can too. You try to find a taker for him. And if it means you take on a couple bad deals in order to get the better trade assets, the better draft picks, then you may have to do that in the short term. But you want to be as flexible as you can financially. And that's why releasing Zion Williamson in that case makes a bit more sense. All right. That's going to do it for today's show. Thank you so much for listening. Thank you so much for your comments on each and every episode. Go ahead and hit that like button, hit the subscribe, and hit the notification bell as well so you don't miss an episode of the Post Up. Until the next time, I am David Grubb. You can find me on social media at DM Grubb. That's Twitter, that's Instagram. You can also find me on Blue Sky and TikTok as well. So for Poop Crew Media, I am David Grubb, and I will see you all on Thursday. Have a great one.